All right, Dave Kranzler, having spent many years working in various analytic jobs and trading on Wall Street, went on to trade junk bonds for Bankers Trust, earning a master's degree in business administration from the University of Chicago. With a concentration in accounting and finance, currently co-manages Golden Returns Capital, a precious metals and mining stock investment fund based in Denver. He writes a blog and offers in-depth, unique research reports to help people understand and analyze what's really going on in our financial system and economy. His website is investmentresearchdynamics.com, and he is Dave Kranzler in his very fashionable Denver Broncos victory shirt. Welcome back, man. How you doing? You look like you're in a pretty good mood.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me back. It took me a couple days to recover from that football game on Sunday, so I'm slowly sort of ramping into a good mood. I was still in shock yesterday.
Well, I'll tell you what's put a bunch of people in shock is that nobody down at this level of things can understand what's going on in the money. I mean, people have been talking about an impending financial collapse now for a couple of years, and somehow that disaster has been averted. I was looking around, and I see, the U.S. is in the green, Europe's in the green. Oh, Asia's got problems, but, Forex is about half and half, all of that stuff. So has anything changed in the last few months? Is there something going on that nobody's talking about, or... I mean, as the debt continues to climb toward $19 trillion, does it? I mean, who counts after $10 trillion? I mean, what? Where are we, Dave? What's going on? Is something going on we should know about and we don't, or is it just business as usual and the numbers don't really mean anything?
Boy, that's you got about 5 hours.
Yeah.
I just wanted to circle back to something you had said sort of at the beginning where you said, people have been warning about a collapse coming for a couple years. And, I mean, really, the murky waters that I swim in, the sharks in those waters have been eyeballing, or been discussing an eventual collapse since probably the days of the internet and tech bubble. And every time they create a bubble, and there's been a series of bigger and bigger bubbles really since the U.S. went on a pure fiat currency standard. And every time these bubbles happened, we had sort of oil real estate in the 70s, we had finance junk bonds in the 80s, there was a whole series of bubbles, mini bubbles in the 90s, well, many compared to what we have now. Then we had the housing and internet, the internet bubble. And that collapse, and I kind of thought that might lead to real systemic reform and a lot of change. And instead, Greenspan just continued. Every time we have these situations and the market starts to collapse, they print money or they increase the availability of credit. And that kind of saves the system, or it doesn't save it, but it kicks all the problems down the road. And then I was convinced that when the tech and internet bubble crashed, that was going to be it. And then all of a sudden they came up with these newfangled mortgage products that led to the housing bubble. And a lot of your listeners have probably either read or seen The Big Short. If they haven't, if anyone hasn't seen that, go see it as soon as possible. It's one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. But that was all created by Greenspan money printing and same with Bernanke and by the availability of these newfangled financial products that let people buy a house with no money down. People were buying houses with taking out loans that were 125% of value. And we had the 2008 collapse, and then the QE started, and that was the overt money printing. And so in terms of whether or not anything's changed in the last couple of weeks, I mean, that's a really good question. And I like to relate it to the comment that's attributed to Hemingway. I think it comes from Farewell to Arms or something, where the main character goes bankrupt, and he said, they ask him, well, how'd you go bankrupt? And he said, slowly and then suddenly. And I think it's one of these things where over the course of the last couple decades, as we've just piled more debt into our system, we've slowly been working ourselves into a condition of bankruptcy, and at some point it just hits. It hits the wall, and boom, that's it. And whether or not this is the big boom or not that we're starting to witness, I don't know. Because I couldn't see the rabbit that they pulled out of the hat when the internet and tech bubble collapsed. And I certainly didn't see the rabbit that they pulled out of the hat when the housing bubble collapsed. And now the question is there another rabbit for them to pull out of the hat? And I honestly don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's the $64,000 question. When a guy like you, who's in it day and night, night and day, day and night, and you say, I don't know. The rest of us are going. The rest of us are saying, I don't know either.
Well, anyone who gets on your show or posts articles on Zero Hedge and says they know, they're lying. They don't know. No one really knows. And I get the same questions from a lot of people and people that even people that would surprise you. It's like, wouldn't you think they would know? And then they're like, is this it? Is this where we're going to collapse? And it's no one knows. I don't even know if the people who are manipulating our system and who have been holding things up, I don't know if they know. And I think that's where the real problem is, because I don't think they know when to stop pushing the limit.
Well, so is it your position that it will collapse? It's just nobody knows when? I keep saying this. I've been saying it for a couple of weeks now. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But, if you've got some smart people, they'll go, yeah, well, this phase has come to an end, but we got a new phase that'll begin. It'll be fine. There'll be we estimate there'll be a transitional period that'll be pretty rough, should last 90 days max, but we'll plan for 150 days, and we should be fine. You would think that there's somebody back there with a backup plan out there somewhere.
Well, first of all, the backup plan is war, but
there you go.
I want to go back to your beginning, middle, and end, and I agree with you. That's a great description, and I think every collapse has a beginning, middle, and end. And honestly, really our system collapsed in 2008. Despite all the rigged and manipulated numbers, the economy hasn't gotten better since 2008. It's gotten a little better for a certain class of people, anyone who's somehow connected to that flow of money that was printed. Wall Street, anyone who makes money off of Wall Street, a lot of financial advisors, with the stock market going up, they've seen their assets under management balloon up, so they make more money. Mortgage brokers, real estate agents, because of the government's just reinflated the housing bubble, and so all they've done is they've reinflated the bubbles, but they haven't really treated the cause of what happened in 2008. And if you look at things like the labor force participation rate, if you look at a real unemployment number, not this BS that the government tries to regurgitate on our plate and make us eat, the real unemployment rate, when you include all the people who've stopped looking for a job because they're discouraged, or the ones who get Social Security disability now, anyone can pretty much qualify for that, or the student loans. You can't find a job? Oh, great. Go get a student loan and go get a degree in underwater basket weaving. And then you're not part of the labor force. But if you count all those people, the real true unemployment rate in this country is probably somewhere around 23 to 25, maybe even as high as 30%. And there's this guy, John Williams, you may or may not know of him. He does a unbelievable newsletter called Shadow Statistics. It's a subscription service. And yeah, so you know him. He'll tell you the real unemployment rate, and the way he calculates it, and I believe what he does is he takes all the adjustments that they've made since 1990, and he goes and he calculates it the way they would calculate it, and it's either 1990 or 1980, I don't remember the date, but he uses how they calculated it back then, and if you calculate the unemployment rate that way, it's more like in the mid-20s. And so, to me, a system that has a de facto unemployment rate of 23% is in collapse. So, what we could be seeing now is if the collapse process has a beginning, middle, and end, maybe we're seeing the beginning of the end part here. Honestly, I don't know. Like I said, no one really knows, but it should give people a little bit of cause of concern that all of a sudden, the war rhetoric's been amped up ever since 911. But I mean, it's really getting amped up now. I mean, the guy who could be considered the leading candidate to be the next president has built his support on a promise to get rid of every Muslim in the United States. So to me, that type of rhetoric, when you see rhetoric like that being thrown around, it tells you that the people who are in control, or trying to be in control of the situation, that's their only solution. They don't have a solution to address the ongoing economic and financial problems that get worse every day.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Pamela Geller published on her website a story that the CCTV records, closed-circuit television records, the recordings of the Köln attacks on New Year's Eve, were ordered erased by the Merkel government. And so you have that going on. Simultaneously, it appears Texas has banned Sharia law in this state. Simultaneously, again, Birth of a Nation electrifies Sundance crowd in a world premiere. So this is all about, according to the film's producer and star, he wants to create change agents. And I can't help but think that, like the change that occurred in the destruction of South Africa through Mandela and his communist operatives. But he is a hero. He is a real freedom fighter, just like every warlord over there is. They're all freedom fighters. So it seems like it falls right into exactly what you're saying. And that is, they can't really address these issues, so they begin doing things that seem to pit the people against each other. And that makes a nice distraction for a while. I don't know, Dave, do you get the feeling that somebody's trying to start a civil war here? Because I kind of sense that, you bring in. Well, first of all, I gotta ask a couple of questions. What sort of effect is we have 25% of Mexico's entire population, the country of Mexico's entire population, 25% of it is now here. Does that help our economy or hurt it? Then we open the door to all of the, give us your downtrodden and your huddled masses and all that. It's like, wow, we didn't know there were quite this many huddled masses out there, but come on in, here they come. Oh, look, they're coming in by the countless millions. They must really like us. No, they don't. They like the space, they don't really like us. Their ideology is the diametric opposite, particularly in the religious department. So I'm just wondering, is this, and man, I think you nailed it, 1 minute into the conversation, said, yeah, well, their backup plan is war. But it may take on an appearance that we're not expecting. Us in our uniforms and bad guys with quotes around them, the enemy in their uniforms, so you know who you're fighting, right? And they have flags, so you've got something convenient to drape over the coffins when you're once again victorious. Of course, both sides think they're going to be victorious, so here we go. But it might not be that. It might be, that 1,000 little Vietnams, all stretching from New York to L.A. and all points in between, I just wonder what... you must have some thoughts on this, where we're actually headed. I mean, I can't imagine that we're just going to muddle through as we have been muddling through since 2008. Okay, that's 8 years ago now. We're going to muddle through it some more until 2024? How? We can't. Can we?
It's a good question. I ponder what kind of time frame they can keep this going for. I ponder that all the time. I like what you say, how you describe, sort of mini battles all across the country. Because to me, part of the symptom of that, and I assume it's the same way around other cities, but I've noticed around Denver, and maybe I'm just paying more attention to it. I don't think so, though. There's a lot more reports of road rage incidences, gunfights, brazen, brazen robberies. The other night on one of the main boulevards here, some gang hit 9 different stores at like 2 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I think it's a symptom of a slow boil of civil unrest. I think it all kind of reflects growing discontent and civil unrest because, yeah, while the upper 1% is making a ton of money, and maybe even the upper 10% of the economic strata in this country has a comfortable lifestyle now. And for a lot of those people, their lifestyle probably has improved since 2008. Below that upper 10%, especially when you get to 50% below, their lifestyle's gotten worse. I mean, even if you left your job and you're living on Social Security disability, I mean, you're not flying off to the Caribbean every 2 months. You know, it's not, you're not getting paid enough to have like a real comfortable lifestyle. It just means you don't have to get up and go to work every day. And so I think you're starting to see. I think if you want to sort of put it in a metaphor, the water's starting to get a lot warmer and the population's starting to feel uncomfortable. And so we're starting to see, I mean, just today there's a report of a shooter at some San Diego University campus.
Yeah, a naval center, I thought it was.
Of that.
Is it a campus, or I thought it was a naval center?
Maybe it's a naval center. I just happened to glance at the headline. I knew it was like, oh, great, another one. Mm. And it seems like there's a lot more of those incidences that are occurring. And so, and in some ways, you know, I have to wonder: is this intentionally being, this type of activity intentionally being stimulated? Because part of what the Patriot Act and some of this other Homeland Security Act, part of what some of this legislation has enabled the executive branch of government to do is start to impose military control over the country. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if they know that something is headed at our system that they can't prevent and it's unavoidable, and we have a serious financial collapse again, which it's coming, it's just who knows when, you're going to create, you know, serious civil unrest and chaos, and that would let them invoke the military, you know, military authority powers that have been given to them by these various acts that were passed after 9/11. Mm. And that's part of what I think's behind all of this.
Okay. You want to hear something? I got a hot flash here. According to the Los Angeles Times, no sign of casualties or other evidence of a shooting have been found in a sweep of the Naval Medical Center San Diego, authorities have said. There is nothing which substantiates reports of a shooting, says Navy Captain Kurt Jones, commanding officer of Naval Base San Diego. Reports of a possible active shooter around 8:22 a.m. I suppose that, as opposed to an inactive shooter, isn't that like a young child? Have you ever seen an old child? No. Report, they act like it, but they're not actually, never mind. Reports of a possible active shooter around 8:22 caused the medical center to issue an alert telling hospital occupants to run, hide, or fight. As the entire country goes weenie, I added that part, apparently someone said they heard 3 shots in the basement of Building 26. Maybe they did not. Maybe they did or not is not the point. That's what they reported, so that's why we responded accordingly. We haven't gotten any reports of any injuries. So, yeah, so there's no sign of a shooting there at the San Diego Medical Center, whatever, Navy. And in the meantime, 2 vans full of black people crash into the Chanel store up at Highland Park, which is, you know, one of the most heavily, it's like the Beverly Hills of Texas, okay?
Right.
And you don't really want to crash into the Chanel store there on Rodeo Drive. I know it's Rodeo, but I says Rodeo. Just so, because I can. But
yeah, why wouldn't you?
And then somebody drives by a club over in Oak Cliff, which is one of the oldest sections of the city, and really is charming, except for this part. There was an argument between some men, and so somebody decided to drive by and fire off a gun, and it killed a woman inside. Guess what color the shooter was? And simultaneously, Black Lives Matter, Birth of a Nation is electrifying Sundance audiences, and Obama is standing by his promise to fundamentally transform America while South Africa burns. Let me give you an interesting stat over there. They got 27 or 28 million unemployed black people. You got about 4 million white people over there, and 1 million of them are unemployed and they're trying to get jobs. And so they want all the white people to leave. Well, it's like, do you folks not have access to a calculator? Because even if you knock some of the zeros off to make it easier, if all the white people leave, you've still got 20 some odd million unemployed black people.
Right.
And it's like, and then let's roll it all together. Here we have, this comes from your site. It was a link from your site. Russian Insider, or actually Russia Insider. Lord Rothschild. Dark clouds forming in Europe, Russia, and Middle East. And he's saying that even though we've made money this year, it's still not good. The banker believes that the combination of a more competitive euro and an aggressive program of quantitative easing and the yields available on equities may well lead to even higher valuations. But in the meantime, the forte, the strong point, is that the value of paper money is reduced substantially. Countries trying to generate growth by lowering the value of their currencies. That's not working. And at the end of 2014, several European countries demonstrated a revived interest in gold as a monetary policy instrument and focused on repatriating their bullion gold reserves. So if Jacob Rothschild is underscoring that the majority of companies are reporting profits exceeding forecasts, together with steady earnings growth, and yet that doesn't make him feel any better. I mean, that just leaves us out here kind of sitting on our hands going, nodding with the moronic, okay. Okay. I mean, this is so extraordinarily complex. Dave, I know you're on your job every day. You've been doing this for years and years, and you know other people who are in it also. And we can't get a straight answer really out of anybody because it goes back to one of your points. Nobody really knows. So, let me ask you this. What should people do so that it doesn't really matter what happens? Outside of a civil insurrection or some insanity, and they're pitting the races against each other and pitting political ideologies against each other, pitting religions against each other. If you just want to say, look, I'm not going to really engage in all that. I'm just going to try and preserve myself and my family and the people I have influence over. I'm going to try and preserve them. What do you think is the best way to do that? Because if you keep reading this news, all it'll do is, make you nuts.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of people out there who get it, and they just choose not to read it and ignore it and just go about their everyday business, and they hope something doesn't happen. Well, I think a lot of them are just, they live in hope and denial. This can't happen in this country. This isn't what we were taught in high school. This is the United States.
Right.
And then I think people just like to ignore it and just say, okay, people who get it or understand something's wrong, ignore it and just say, well, something will come along and save this. But I don't think I've ever seen any history book that has shown me anything that's come along and saved empires once they're collapsing. Have you?
No. That's that whole everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end thing. They may morph into something else, but it's not. You're not going back to the way it was.
That's right.
You can't do it.
I like to always just point to Rome. That's the archetypical example. But to me, it's the perfect example. Rome morphed into something, but it wasn't like Rome was when Caesar took over. So, in terms of if you know something's coming and you want to brace for impact. Again, this is a conversation that I've had with myself and with colleagues for the better part of 15 years. And the ultimate solution is, if you really want to get away, and it's not practical for 99%, is to just get out of the country and go somewhere where there's a little bit of civilization but is somewhat remote, and get set to live a different lifestyle, albeit one that's going to be out of the line of fire. On the other hand, I think, first of all, my personal belief is that we're starting to see totalitarian really quickly creep into our governmental system. And for instance, the blog post that I put up today, that references a war resolution that Mitch McConnell snuck into the Senate agenda, that if it ends up being passed by both houses of Congress, and again, it's a long way from here to there, but if it ends up being passed, it's going to give essentially the executive branch or the Oval Office the ability to declare war on an unfettered basis against anyone of sort of Muslim descent that they think is, or they suspect is connected to any of these, terrorist groups.
Yeah, what Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy said was that this resolution is a total rewrite of the War Powers Clause of the Constitution. Let's be clear about that. It's essentially a declaration of international martial law. Let's see, what else? Speaking out against the fast-track authorization of the use of military force, a bill proposed by Mitch McConnell, Mr. Turkey Neck. Murphy explained that the resolution would permanently hand over war-making authority to the office of the president. And he said, a sweeping transfer of military power to the president that will allow him or her to send U.S. troops almost anywhere in the world for any reason with absolutely no limitations. It's like, thanks, Mitch. Why don't you go jump off the Hollywood sign after your last trip to Disneyland? God, I mean,
what's frightening about that is it doesn't limit it to outside of the United States. I mean, if they think something's getting ready to go down in L.A., they can have the military storm L.A.
Mm-hmm.
Start shooting people who have suntans and beards. There's going to be a lot of scared hipsters running around that city.
Yeah, no kidding. A lot of surfers are going to be lost in the melee. Yeah,
right.
But dude, I'm not Muslim. Boom. Oh well.
Right.
Collateral damage. Oh.
Well, we suspect it, and we're allowed to shoot you.
God Almighty! I really don't know where. I don't know where we're headed here, but wherever it is, it's not good. It really isn't. I wasn't reading this martial law thing. To me, martial law is when you've got people out on the street, like a National Guard and police, and they got their gear on, and they shoot looters on sight, and you have curfews imposed. But I suppose there are many other forms of martial law as well. But that's the one that we kind of recognize as being martial law, checkpoints and all that stuff. It's.
We've had some incidences where they've imposed that I can't remember the name of that city outside of St. Louis.
Yeah. Oh,
they
yeah.
had the National Guard in there.
Yeah.
There were tanks rolling down the street.
Yeah, you're talking about Ferguson.
Ferguson, yeah, I knew it started with an F.
Yeah, well, if people would stay home and not set their own neighborhoods on fire first before moving on to other neighborhoods, they probably wouldn't need all those tanks rolling around out there. That combined with the mainstream media, and some of which is claiming to be alternative media, out there getting up in cops' faces, practically begging them to beat them up. I mean, I don't think that's helpful.
Well, here's a good. I like that, because here's a good example of how different it is now versus the 1980s. Because remember when the Detroit Pistons used to win the NBA championship, they would set neighborhoods on fire there and set cars on fire, and they wouldn't declare martial law, and the National Guard wouldn't go in there. It was just, they're celebrating.
Yes.
Now it's a completely different thing in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, it's an ancient celebratory ritual, you see. Yes, they and in fact sometimes they get such a fervor develops in their celebratory mood that they actually hang tires full of gasoline around each other's necks and light them on fire. And then there is a ritualistic dance of death, and it's quite amusing. I mean, the community really gets into it. Hey, look, I just call them how I see them. It's like, if you act like an idiot and you keep acting like an idiot, I'm pretty sure you're an idiot, and just kind of thinking, maybe attitudes follow prolonged observations of behavior. And when it comes to these dudes up in, I was just getting, not really crossways, but having a spirited debate with Chris Milligan. He publishes a lot of what would otherwise be termed underground books, real, skull and bones books, and he publishes a lot of good books from written by a lot of really good authors that you're not going to see. You're not going to see it at Barnes and Noble. And the thing is that the one thing that I keep taking exception to, it's one thing when you're helpless and you can't help yourself. You do need help. But I thought that had been traditionally in this country all kinds of organizations, starting with the church. There were charities. If you don't have enough, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. If you break your leg and you got no money, well, you go to the county hospital. They will fix you up. Medicaid was in place for people who didn't make enough money to qualify for regular insurance. But there seems to be this idea that everybody can be taken care of. I mean, Dave, what if we don't want to be taken care of? What if we want to take care of ourselves? I mean, what comes next? It's like, well, I'm sorry, but that violates our new constitutional paradigm, which is it's not fair to the others if you take care of yourself. You have to allow us to take care of you because, well, you're being unmutual. If you take care of yourself, I mean, you're separating yourself from the herd, and that this is simply not allowed. Isn't that kind of where we go eventually? As look at all the stuff that's happening now that would have been the stuff of some 60s satire on societies of the future. We're living it now.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering to what extreme it'll actually go.
It's socially and politically incorrect to want to take care of yourself, John.
Wow.
I think the government has sort of enabled this to a large degree, because once you're reliant on the government to take care of you, it gives them more control over you. And again, it sort of fits in with my thesis that we're creeping towards totalitarianism. And now I think it's more of like a jog towards totalitarianism. And I think we saw that with all that legislation that was passed after 9/11, and I mean, it's gotten worse. And remember, I mean, Obama was the guy who campaigned in 2008 that he was going to undo all that stuff. He was going to undo all the executive orders that Bush signed. And instead, once he got in there, he made them even worse. And I think it's just, I think it's kind of like the tide. The tide of totalitarianism is coming in. How do you stop a tide from coming in? You can't.
Yeah, I understand that there's going to be a huge problem with. I mean, it's. Dave, let me ask you this: did you think when you got into the business that you were in, the business, the act of being busy, the busyness, when you got into it, did you think that it was, or were you under the impression that this was going to be a fairly, there'd be ups and downs in the market for sure, but did you feel that? Did you believe that this was, gosh, how can I put this? Sort of like, you got durable goods, stuff that lasts more than 10 years. I thought that was, I think it's 10 years, maybe it's 5, but I thought it was, washing machines and heavy-duty mixers and stuff. These are durable goods because they last a long time. Did you think that this was a durable business that you were getting into? Did you ever have an idea that you would be rolling philosophy, sociology, and everything else into your numbers crunching, just so to speak?
That's a good question. I mean, when I got out of college, I didn't really think that broadly. Even though I had a liberal arts education, I wanted to go to Wall Street and make money. I mean, I knew the history of the stock market, and I knew about the 1929 crash and the series of lower lows that happened during the 30s. I knew about the Depression. But when I got out of college, I wasn't thinking in front of my next paycheck, or I wasn't thinking in front of the next bonus check. And that's the mentality on Wall Street. They don't care what it takes. All they care about is their next bonus payment. And that's part of the mentality that's gotten us into this problem. And it's what I've seen change over the course of the last 30 years, and it's always been corrupt. There's always been an element of corruption, but it's gotten just infinitely more corrupt than when I was there. I mean, when I was really there in the in the heart of the battle as a junk bond trader in the 90s. I mean, we did whatever we could to get away with whatever we could get away with. But there were people watching us. There were back office people and compliance people. And I mean, we treaded lightly whenever they were around. We could occasionally get away with hiding things from them. But if they found things, we got reported, and I mean, you risk losing your job. And the difference between the 1990s and now is that the compliance people and the back office people and the people who are supposed to impose the laws that are in place, they're in on the scam too. They don't want you to adhere to the law because then it affects their bonus check. They get a smaller bonus check. And it's really, I mean, Wall Street and D.C. have really lapsed into just complete unfettered corruption. And that, I mean, I never foresaw that happening when I left college and went to New York to work on Wall Street. Not in a million years. I mean, I was sort of, I'm sure you were the same way. I was raised believing that there was right and wrong and that you were supposed to do your best to adhere to what was right. And it was, I mean, I'm not a guy who's like, I don't get terrorized by the idea of sin, but it was not cool to do things that were wrong. Well, when I got to Wall Street, it was not uncool to do things that were wrong as long as it gave me a little bigger bonus. But now it's like it's cool to do things that are wrong because it gives you a gigantic bonus, and that's where things have gotten. And to me, it almost smells like the time in Rome where it was just unfettered orgies and bestiality and just complete moral decay. And I think that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I'm pretty sure you saw this, but it's being reported as of yesterday by Stephen Dinan or Dinan, D-I-N-A-N. The federal government will be flirting with $30 trillion in debt within a decade. This is according to the Congressional Budget Office. They reported this yesterday, blaming an aging population, new spending, and tax cuts approved on Capitol Hill, and the growing burden from Obamacare for erasing the progress Washington had made over the past few years. Analysts said Obamacare will chase more workers out of the labor force over the next 5 years, adding pressure to an economy still struggling to spring to life more than 7 years into Obama's recovery. The Affordable Care Act itself is still struggling to attract a customer base, the CBO said, lowering its estimate for the number of people who will sign up for the exchanges from 21 to 13 million people, a drop of nearly 40% in projections. Customers collecting taxpayer subsidies this year will be 11 million, down from the 15 million the CBO projected a year ago. These people could screw up a one-car procession. You know? I mean, seriously. Look, tell us what to do. Should we buy gold and silver? Should we secede from the Union? Come on. I know you know the answer to this. I know you know I know you know the future, and I want for you to tell everybody right now on Caravan to Midnite, what should we do?
We secede. I mean, I thought Texas was already in the process of seceding from the Union.
Actually, I think there is a soft secession going on here. I can only hope. Seriously,
I think right now, here's my thing, and it gets back to you asking what people can do if they want to brace for impact, the impact of what's coming.
I think we better.
And I think the best thing you can do is any cash that you manage to save, don't keep it in the bank. Just convert it into gold or silver, whatever you can afford. I mean, silver now on an inflation-adjusted basis is cheaper than it was when I started in on this sector in 2001. When I started in on this sector, it was about $4.35 an ounce. So now it's a little over $14 an ounce. On an inflation-adjusted basis, it's cheaper now than it was then. So to me, silver is the best thing that you can do with your cash. Don't put it in the stock market. Don't go buy bonds. Don't put it in a CD, because a lot of these banks are going to go belly up, and your CD is going to be part of what's used to bail them out. I'm sure all your listeners are aware of the bail-in dynamic that's gonna sweep the country.
Is that going to happen, Dave?
It will happen, yeah. I mean, it's already been a directive issued by the Bank of International Settlements, and it's something that was agreed upon by one of the G numbers, G12, like not just the G6 or G7 or G8. It was the G, whatever the number was. They all agreed on it in, I want to say, 2012. So, and the bail-in directives have slowly been phased into sovereign legislation in Europe, and it's actually starting to be phased into some of the legislation that's been passed in this country. There's some derivatives legislation that has language in it that looks and smells like bail-in resolutions. So it is coming, because instead of the taxpayers directly bailing out these banks when they collapse, all the bail-in means is that if you're a creditor of the bank, what you're owed is going to be part of what's used to restructure the bank or bail it in. And when you deposit money in the bank, and most people aren't aware of this, that's actually a bank liability, and you become a creditor to the bank. The bank owes you that money, but that doesn't mean it's yours to go to the bank and say, "Hey, I want my money back." If they can't give you the money, they don't have to. So, and most people aren't aware of that. They think their money in the bank is safe. People put their money in CDs. Oh, I got these CDs maturing. Well, if that bank goes belly up before that CD matures, I'm sorry, you're probably not going to see that money.
And by the way, they pay off the FDIC in as much as it is able to. Tell me if this is correct, Dave. They pay off the smaller accounts first, and then they pay off the bigger ones. Is that true, or is it the other way around?
I don't know what the legal dictate is in terms of how the FDIC the order of payout. However, the FDIC is going to be irrelevant. The FDIC is badly underfunded. I mean, it's not even, the FDIC has a small fraction of what it would take. If we had something happen like remember the SNL crisis?
Oh yeah, it was right here in the middle of it.
Right, there you go. Okay, well, the FDIC was, that people got their money back eventually. What they did first is they established that resolution trust corporation that liquidated all those assets. Well, I wouldn't call them assets. They liquidated the holdings of the banks, and they threw that money into the kitty, and then the FDIC made up the difference, and people got paid out from that. But we're talking, and again, I was looking at the numbers a couple months ago, so these aren't exact numbers, but let's say that the SNL crisis, let's just say it was somewhere between a $20 and $30 billion crisis. I mean, we're talking about the next crisis. I mean, it was the taxpayers anteed up $800 billion to bail out the largest banks in '08, and now the problem's even bigger. So we're talking trillions of dollars. The FDIC, and I haven't even looked at the number recently. It's so small. The FDIC is not even close to being funded for this. And what's interesting, and again, a lot of your listeners, because your listeners are on the ball and they stay on top of this, but for the ones that aren't aware of this, when they passed the Budget Act, they also slipped into it, and this legislation was written by Citicorp and handed to Citicorp's foot soldiers in Congress, the congressmen that they pay off. They wrote in legislation that lets the banks move their derivatives to their bank holding company, which is the entity that is covered by the FDIC. So when all these derivatives blow up, it'll then become a liability of ultimately the FDIC. Well, the FDIC is going to be bankrupt and won't be able to fund it, so that means they're going to turn to depositors as part of the solution to bail these banks out or keep some of them afloat. I mean, these guys know all this is coming, and you can see this when you look at the legislation that they're starting to pass, and that's what troubles me about this Mitch McConnell resolution. I mean, you can sort of read how much, what they see when you see this stuff. You know what I mean? So, and the bail-in stuff, that was a Western banking system agreement that was agreed to in 2012. So they knew back then they were going to run into a wall again with all this crap.
Oh boy. Well, all right then. So I notice you use the S word and not the G word. You're thinking that silver is a better place to put your money than gold.
that's a good point, and I think I'd use silver because most people aren't walking around with $1,100 in their pocket to buy an ounce of gold.
True.
And I wouldn't buy the fractional. You can go into a coin dealer and buy like a 20th of an ounce or a 10th of an ounce, but you pay a really high premium over the spot price.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm recommending silver because to me, silver is actually the original monetary metal before gold was. And so silver's all, everyone, the snake oil salesmen on Wall Street want us to think of silver as a commodity, but it's not. It's ultimately a monetary metal. It just so happens to function as for commodity purposes because it's a great conductor of electricity. But it's always been a monetary metal, and that goes back to before the Roman Empire. And so to the extent that silver is a monetary metal, the same way that gold is, right now, and I don't know the gold-silver ratio off the top of my head, but it's probably something like 75 to 1. So you can buy 75 ounces of silver for the cost of 1 ounce of gold. And silver's more fungible. If we get to the point where the dollar collapses and no one wants to take dollars, and don't think that can't happen. When I was in Italy 3 years ago, I went up to a vendor and tried to pay for something with dollars, thinking, oh, well, they'll just take the dollars and give me euros in exchange. He said, no, I can't take those. So it's not like the dollar is usable everywhere in the world. But I guarantee you if I had a silver eagle and pulled it out, she would have taken it in a heartbeat. And that's my point about silver. I mean, if you got $1,000 that you don't need for bills and you don't need it to feed your family, go buy some silver and just stash it away and get your money out of the banking system. Because that's going to be the first step that you need to take to brace for what's coming. But in gold too, gold is if you're sitting around, if you're big money bags and you've got a lot of cash sitting, if you got a CD and it's maturing next month, take that and go buy gold. Gold is by far, gold and silver are by far the cheapest investments that I've seen in 30 years of doing this on a relative basis, relative to everything else.
Yeah, I got a feeling that when wasn't it this so-called attorney general up there, this Loretta Lynch, talking about how they're trying to get bank tellers to squeal on people who take out as much as five grand because we can seize those funds or at least begin an investigation because it might have to do with drugs. It's like everybody knows the United States government is the biggest drug dealer on the face of the earth. They're worried about $5 grand, please. It's like, so I suspect that the reason they did that is to discourage people from having too much cash on them because they could have it just seized. I mean, I'm guessing, but that's what I think.
Well, again, I think that's why. I mean, I'm sure you've already had discussions about the proposals to go to a cashless society and have your funds. It would all be electronic. You're aware of that, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Well, again, it's this control mechanism. If you take cash out of the bank and you have wealth in your pocket or money in your pocket that you can use however you want to use it, it takes control away from them. If they see what you're doing electronically online in your bank account, and where you're spending your money and where you're moving it, it gives them more control over you. And that's all part and parcel of this jog towards totalitarianism that we're in now. And that's another point about why get your cash out of the banking system now, convert it into precious metals, because it doesn't matter whether they outlaw precious metals or not. It's always going to be fungible, and you're always going to be able to use it because there's always going to be someone who's going to say, if we get to a situation where you got to barter for food and water, the person will say, hey, if you got any gold and silver, I'll trade you some of my food and water for your gold or silver. And that's what it'll come down to. It won't be, you won't be able to transfer electronic credits from his bank account, from your bank account to his bank account. And even if you could, he won't take that. He wants hard money.
Yeah, well, the only reason that these mugs want to go cashless is so that they can hit you with a fee on every transaction. It'll be easier to seize your account. It'll be easier to levy, tax liens and collect them collect on them and all that. That's nothing but a control mechanism. I just wonder if people still have the desire for privacy. Largely, the society has lost its modesty. They seem to be okay with having their privacy compromised. You know, Dave, sometimes when I get really into that, see, I'm one of these people that, like, I don't mind a fight. I don't even mind a fight that I can't win, because the other side, they may win, but they're going to know they've been in one for a long time. And I'm okay with that if it's a righteous fight. The only fight you don't want to get into is an unrighteous fight. You know, you can't fight with everything you've got if you're in the wrong. You can't. But I really wonder if the citizens of this country and of the world have the pluck, have the desire to really live free, or if they're just edging closer and closer to that line. And that line is, when they go across it, it's like, okay, we surrender. You can have the privacy. You can, okay, give us your liver. Oh, okay, if somebody else needs my liver, I guess you can take it. You know, so to speak. You know, that thing. I just wonder if we're turning into a bunch of voluntary sacrificial lambs, you know?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about right there, I mean, Aldous Huxley wondered about that, 70 years ago? Yeah. I mean, it's Brave New World. I mean, that's exactly what that was his vision, was a society where everyone gives up control to the government.
Well, are you thoroughly depressed now that you've had this conversation with me?
This is the stuff I wake up to every day, John. It doesn't, I mean, I'm almost immune to it.
Yeah, well, I think it's good to be immune to it, because if you are, then you can think straight, you can think rationally, and maybe you can actually come up with a solution. I got to ask you about China, though. Man, they're spending a lot of time. I generally look at Market Watch, just because you get the real-time thing. I'm sure there are others out there. That's just the one I look at all the time.
Yep.
But, boy, they've been spending a lot of time in the red. I mean, are they going to be able to pull this plane out of its dive, or is it going to go into the mountainside there?
China's an interesting topic, and it's one of those things where I'm wondering if, you know how a musician wants to create a distraction so that you're not watching how he does the trick.
Oh yeah.
You know that whole adage. You know, like you see that you walk around New York City and there's a shell game, and you watch these guys and you're like convinced you know where it is because you're watching their hands, but they create a distraction so you don't see where they're putting the. I don't know how they do it, but I never picked the right shell. That's why I never bet on it. But I've seen a lot of people get taken on it. I'm kind of wondering if that's what China's doing with their currency devaluation and some of the other things. I mean, there was a bubble there for sure. I mean, a huge bubble. But it's not like there isn't a bubble in the United States or in Europe or Australia or Canada. I mean, Canada's starting to suffer from the energy bubble in a big way. And I kind of look at China, and all of a sudden it looks like... my theory is I think what they're trying to do is they know there was a huge bubble there, and I think they're trying to let the air out of it in a controlled fashion, because it's obvious what kind of destruction is created when a bubble pops.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of thinking if they're the first one to do it, they'll be the ones who will be able to have a little more control over the deflation of their bubble. And then everyone else, because if it'll sort of be like, a virus that spreads, the bubbles get popped everywhere else. And because everyone else wasn't bracing for impact and they weren't getting ready for this, they're not going to have the kind of, the damage is going to be a lot greater in the Western countries when this big bubble blows than it will be in China. I mean, look what China's been doing. They've been buying gold hand over fist, and a lot of people think it was just for the last 5 years. It's been for like the last 25 or 30 years. I mean, they've been accumulating massive amounts of gold. They've been slowly weaning themselves off of the dollar. They've been taking a lot of measurements to sort of brace for this. Most people probably aren't even aware of this, but really, since the early 2000s, they've had programs in place to encourage their population to buy gold. silver, it used to be illegal to buy silver there until, again, don't hold me to this date. It was either 2010 or 2012 when they made it legal for Chinese citizens to buy silver. And they encourage their citizens. You talk about, we walk into banks here and we get flagged for taking, more than a certain amount out of the bank in terms of cash, right? Well, you can go into banks there and you can buy gold and silver in the bank. And a lot of different forms of gold and silver. You go right up to the teller and you say, okay, this is what I want. And you can buy gold and silver. And to me, that's the sign of a system in a country that has a policy in place where they're bracing, they're getting ready, they're bracing for impact of a global financial and economic crash that's unavoidable, but they're also preparing for the next phase after that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And people like, you wake up every day, our markets are down because China was down. Well, maybe our markets are down, you idiot, because our stocks are insanely overvalued, and they should have never been as high as they got in the first place. Forget about it being China's fault. It's everyone in this country's collective fault who invested in stocks and chased them higher. And the other thing that's interesting, and I can't believe no one's even talked about this, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's noticed this. Well, I mean, as you're aware, China has something like 30% of its currency reserves are in the dollar, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so and we're talking about, it's like the last time I saw the number, and I don't know what it is now. It's something like 1.2 trillion. That's about what they own in treasuries, and they have been slowly bleeding those out to the market. I mean, they obviously can't unload them all at once, but when they devalue their currency, the yuan versus the dollar, it increases the value of a third of their FX reserves, right? The value of those dollars go up. And ostensibly, the yuan, if they devalue it versus the dollar, it also goes down versus the euro. Well, guess what? The euro is another huge component of their currency reserves. So even though they're devaluing their currency, it's increasing the value of their currency reserves. So how much damage are they really doing to themselves or their markets by doing that? And then we don't even consider the amount of gold that they're holding, because no one really knows what the real number is. I mean, I've seen estimates. If the U.S. allegedly owns 8,000 tons of gold, which no one believes is really there, and China's now telling us that they own, I don't know, something like 1,100 tons or 1,600, whatever the number is. I don't even pay attention to that number because it's BS. I've seen research that's been put out by a guy named Alistair McLeod, and he's looked into it as in depth as anyone I've seen, and he's one of the brightest guys I've ever read out there, and I've been reading him for well over 10 years. And he's put out research that suggests China has probably somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 tons of gold. So even if the U.S. does have 8,000 tons of gold, which it doesn't, China still has at least 3 times as much.
Which it doesn't. Hey, Dave, I'd love to talk to you about 2 or 3 other things. I know you're a busy man, but if you've got another half an hour to spend with us, I'd love to spend it with you.
Sure, no problem.
All right, we're going to take a little short break here, folks, and play some tunes. All right, just a single tune, not tunes. And which reminds me, when's the last time anybody heard on some rock and roll station or something 3 songs go by, segued beautifully one to another, and then a short commercial break? Oh, yeah, about 30 years ago. Never mind, forget I said anything. We'll be right back.
This is Caravan to Midnight, the John B. Wells program. Here is John B.